Welcome everybody. Today in our discussion we're going to talk in kind of general terms about how do you configure Active Directory Federation services for Office 365. Once again, for those of you that have joined, if you do have any questions during our discussion, please feel free to use the chat panel in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will respond to those as soon as we can. At the end, we will also have a Q&A time where you can also use the chat panel as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining our discussion on configuring Active Directory Federation services for Office 365. Most of you are aware, Office 365 offers really two options for authenticating your users. One is to use a cloud identity model or account based in Azure Active Directory. And the other is to use your on-premise Active Directory in conjunction with the Azure AD to authenticate your users. The difference being with on-premise Federation or ADFS, it's a way to really keep the user passwords information local and use your on-premise directory to authenticate those users. Helps prevent and reduce some of the risk associated with passwords stored up in Azure AD, the hashes, things of that nature. As well as Federation and ADFS can be used for more than just Office 365, I'm sure you're aware. It can be used for pretty much almost every cloud and SaaS application out there in the market, and as well as it can be used as a relaying party to something like Azure, which then it can be an intermediary to authenticate to other systems as well. So for our agenda today, we'll talk a little bit about who we are, Celestix as a company. We'll talk in general high terms, what are some of the considerations for Active Directory Federation services and the Azure AD Connect, and we'll spend a little time talking about Azure AD Connect and how it plays in that realm. We'll talk about the prerequisites you will need. We'll talk about installing and configuring. It's a very straightforward process. We'll talk about integrating the authentication, talk about enabling Derr sync, and summary next steps. And we'll also talk about our CelestixFederated solution and how we can minimize some of those pain points for you as well. And then wrap up with Q&A time. So a little bit about Celestix and about who I am. So I'm your host today, Benjamin Derr, Senior Sales Engineer with Celestix Networks. Been with Celestix for about 2 years, and my role is all pre-sales technical activity for our North America region. Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer and Systems Administrator. And I've been in the business for about 19 years with really a background around core infrastructure, manageability of endpoints, and remote access solutions. So a little about Celestix. We've been in business since 1999 and really started off as an OEM hardware manufacturer for companies such as RSA, Checkpoint, and other vendors. Since then, we've branched into other Microsoft-centric solutions. And you may have heard of our MSA product, which was geared toward Microsoft ISA server or TMG server, our UAG server, and now lately our direct access and our Federation solution. Worldwide company based in Silicon Valley with presence in the UK, Singapore, China, and Japan. Currently over 5,000 customers under active maintenance. From global alliances, we do work with a lot of the channel partners, so CDWs, the SHIs of the world, as well as we are embedded with the Microsoft development team. So let's talk a little about some of the considerations for Active Directory Federation service and really kind of dive into the meat of our discussion today. So from a planning perspective, and for those of you that haven't worked with Active Directory Federation service, it's really just a component of Windows Server. And specifically, we're going to talk about Windows Server 2012 R2 and ADFS 3.0 as it's more commonly called. It's a role within it. So from a licensing perspective, there's nothing to purchase beyond the server license. There's two distinct roles within Active Directory Federation servers. The first you have, these are Federation servers, and these are what do the bulk of the workload. These will sit, as I'll describe later, in your production network. They store the configuration and really the point of your administration, and where the majority of your users will authenticate to, and is also responsible for creating the claims and packaging them and send them to your browser for authentication. You also have the proxy role, or Federation proxy, in conjunction with what's called the web application proxy, and it kind of dual roles there. The Federation servers, as I mentioned, are joined to the production Active Directory, and they will reside in your internal network. So they are going to authenticate users via Kerberos. They're going to do lookups and all the good matching there, as well as I said, hold the storage configuration for the user and configuration information. Your proxies, again, are really for like it says, a proxy. It's a kind of gateway to the Federation infrastructure. They may or may not be joined to Active Directory. It depends upon your security model and how you like to work there, and if you're using any of the features of the web application proxy. But typically, they'll be in a work group. They usually reside in the DMZ network, and they're open to the internet. The difference being, really, when you think about it from a customer-facing perspective or end-user perspective, internal users will usually authenticate and receive their claims from the internal federation servers. And then external customers, or external users, will connect to the proxies to receive their claims. The proxy itself doesn't authenticate the users. It simply opens up a web service channel to the internal proxy servers, and then will pass along and receive the information from those internal proxies for the claims. Other considerations, obviously we want to think about high availability. So in other words, how do we make sure our service is always active and always available? If, for example, you have a single federation server and it goes down during the day, unplanned maintenance or a failure, power outage, users are not going to be able to authenticate to Office 365 or your other applications. So we typically recommend you would deploy these in pairs or multiples of 2, 3, 4, however many data centers you may have. And you achieve the high availability through load balancing, either through a hardware load balancer like an F5 or a Cisco ACE, or through software load balancing like Microsoft NLP service. The challenge with some of the software built-in solution like Microsoft NLP is that all your federation servers need to be on the same subnet. If you have a stretched VLAN between two data centers, it's easily achievable. But for organizations that have distinct subnets between data centers, they maybe want to look at a load balancing solution or some sort of global load balancing traffic manager. You're going to need a public IP address. And this IP address is obviously going to be mapped to your external firewall. I don't typically recommend putting proxies exposed directly to the internet. They can be behind a NAT firewall, no problem. But that public IP address is what's going to allow external users to connect to your federation proxies. Lastly, you have user principal names involved. This is probably one of the more complicated pieces of Office 365, and it's a general Office 365 requirement anyway. The way it works is an Active Directory attribute, and it's configured upon in the user profile itself. You'll go into Domains and Trust, and you'll configure a UPN for the domain, and then you'll configure the appropriate user accounts with that particular UPN. You can use PowerShell too as well, and make it part of your provisioning. But this must be your public domain name that you've configured in Office 365. Because what has to happen is that domain Active Directory has to respond to those lookup requests for that particular user. Other prerequisites that we must be considerate of, DNS. The biggest component is that we have to have a federation service name. And the federation service name is just an FQDN name or DNS label that we assign to our federation infrastructure. It cannot be the same name as the ADFS server. So if you have a single server you're testing out, it has to be something different. For example, maybe our ADFS server is adfs.contoso.com, but we want our federation name to be sts.contoso.com or ADFS ticket, something different. You must have a split-brain DNS. And what we mean by that is that same public and internal domain name needs to be available internally and externally. We're serving up different records. Because we want our internal users to go to our internal proxies, our internal ADFS servers, and our external users to go to our proxy servers or through the firewall. What happens in the authentication chain is that the user will be redirected, or the user's browser, upon connecting to Office 365, will be redirected to a single federation server name, and that has to be available both internally and externally. For DNS, if you do not have a split-brain DNS, you can use what's called a thumbprint record, where essentially you're creating an entire zone just based upon that whole server name or the federation name. And there's articles out there that you can look up to see how to do that, and it's pretty straightforward. Certificates, really for Office 365 and Federation, you only need to procure one certificate, and that will be our SSL certificate or our Service Communication Certificate. And typically you'll get that from a GoDaddy or a VeriSign, things of that nature. You also need a token signing and decryption certificate, but these are usually self-signed. Some SaaS vendors may have a requirement for these to be publicly rooted. Office 365 does not. You'll need a service account too as well for ADFS, and it's just an Active Directory-based account, and it can be just a normal user account. For those of you that are running Active Directory in 2012 functional modes, both forest and domain, you can use what's called a global managed service account, where ADFS will create and manage the account itself. so that you don't have to create a normal user account. And then the only other piece of software you'll need is the Azure AD Connect tool. It's a new tool that was released earlier this year. Previously, we had a tool called Derr and Microsoft Online Sign-In Assistant and the Windows Azure or the Azure AD PowerShell modules. This takes care of everything for us now. So the Azure AD Connect is the new tool, and they expand the capabilities for Office 365 scenarios exclusively. And this link is available here, or you can just Google it yourself or Bing it. So let's talk a little about Azure AD Connect. Formerly known as Derr, again, the previous iteration of the tool was a good tool, and its whole job was really to take data from Active Directory and synchronize it up into Azure AD. And then optionally do some write back if we wanted to, so they'll pull some data down. It's based off of the Microsoft FIM engine, or Forefront Identity Manager engine, so get into it. Was a little bit of a learning curve for some folks, but you really didn't need to do too much into it unless you were really trying to troubleshoot. One of the limitations of Derr as well in the second bullet is that it was a single forest only. So for organizations that had multiple forests but a single Office 365 subscription, they had to do either domain consolidation or create a new forest and domain and put all the users and synchronize them in there, or come up with some other options there. This, instead, can connect to multiple forests automatically. So much more robust there. It is a single point of failure in the sense that, hey, if it goes down, you're not going to have any directory synchronization. Now, it's not typically a big issue because this can be installed on a virtual machine. It can be installed with ADFS. You can stand up a new instance and just have it connect automatically and start synchronizing data back and forth. So from an average perspective, synchronization is not happening in real time. They're usually occurring about once every 3 hours regardless. So you do have some time. And the most effect is, hey, terminations are new employees. So you can stand up something new, a new server, a new reinstalled software anywhere else, and get back up and running very quickly. Some of the new capabilities in the Azure AD Connect, as I mentioned, that's multi-forest capable, has the ability to write back. So for example, if you say, hey, you know, we really want users to be able to set their passwords in both Azure AD and on-premise AD. Well, you can have that information written back. Or, hey, maybe we want people to update groups in Azure AD, distribution list, for example, and have that be able to write back. It does a lot of that. And as well as activity reporting, too, as well. So now that we kind of talked about the prerequisites and what's involved there, pretty straightforward. Let's talk a little about installing and configuring ADFS. So installation is pretty straightforward, like I mentioned here. There's a lot of new terminology, and some people, you know, get a little confused by some of the terms, or maybe they look at it and goes, okay, it's a little more complicated than what it should be, but it's pretty straightforward once you've been working with it for a while. To install it, ADFS servers basically provision 2 server VMs at start. These can be also on physical hardware if you like to. These can be in Azure or Amazon. It can be anywhere regardless, as long as they're joined to your production AD and have a quick response to a domain controller. So using Server Manager, you'll simply go and say, I want to install a feature or a role, install the ADFS role, accept all the defaults, and then go next. Once that's installed, you can install the public certificate you procured. This certificate can be a wildcard cert, or it can be with a specific name of the service itself. That's all it really needs. And there's no other configuration really required from there. Once you do have the ADFS role configured, installed, it'll ask you to run through the ADFS configuration wizard. And what you'll do here is you'll assign the Federation service name, again, that DNS name that identifies the service itself. You'll assign the service account, either the normal AD-based service account, or select the option for your managed service account in the Active Directory. You'll select the service communication certificate. Again, that's why we installed before. You will use the option to use self-sign for what's called the token decryption and the token signing certificates, because Office 365 does not need a public certificate for those. And we recommend using Windows Internal Database for the ADFS storage. We didn't talk too much about this, but let me touch on that for a minute. With ADFS, you have 2 options for storing the configuration data. You can either use SQL Server, which comes with licensing costs and things of that nature, or you can use Windows Internal Database. With the Windows Internal Database, you can have up to 5 ADFS servers in a farm. does not count proxies. And you can do, for most of the scenarios, it'll work fine. If you have larger requirements than that, you can use a SQL cluster, an enterprise SQL cluster, for example. You will have to go and create the databases manually, assign permissions manually, but it allows for some other advanced scenarios like credential replay if that ever comes up. It doesn't typically come up too often, which is why 99% of deployments are primarily around the Windows internal database. And then on the second ADFS server, once you've configured the first one, you'll simply you'll install the role again, run through the setup wizard, and select the option to join the existing farm. You'll enter the service account information, and then you'll go on with life. Also make sure that you have installed the certificate too as well. The second step here is enabling the directory synchronization, and we're going to be doing the directory synchronization, as I mentioned, through Azure AD. If you've worked with previous incarnations of Derr Sync and ADFS, it's going to look a little different, and it's going to do a lot of the other steps for us automatically. So it's a very nice, streamlined tool. The Azure AD server can be an ADFS server. Cannot be a domain controller. It's about the only requirement here. You will need domain enterprise admin credentials when you log on. And there's only one per Office 365 instance. So if you have multiple Office 365 instances or subscriptions, you probably should have multiple Azure AD setups there, configurations. You'll install the Azure AD Connect. You'll download the MSI from Microsoft. Just run through the setup. The one option you'll do is you want to choose the custom settings. There's an express settings option that just does the native cloud identity portion. Enter your Azure AD administrator account. Enter your credentials. And so the Azure AD administrator account, just want to be clear, it's going to be your Office 365 admin account. Your AD enterprise admin credentials, and the primary federation service name and the service account credentials. So you will need those options. And then you can choose your options. Do you want to do write back? Would you like to have changes written back from Azure AD? What is your federated domain names? Do you want to stage or begin sync automatically? And this is a new option here. So you can migrate if you have existing, say for example, Windows 2008 R2 based ADFS and Derr Sync. You can prepare your infrastructure and stage it, and then when you're ready to cut over, you can begin that cut over at that time. And then it'll configure Office 365 manually. So you don't need to go into PowerShell and run convert MSO online, Federated. You don't need to do any of those options here. It will do all automatically for you as part of the setup wizard. So at this point, it's all pretty much configured at this point. So once you've clicked next and you begin your sync, you're already converted. You have converted your Office 365 instance over to federated entities. You can start using a federation infrastructure, and you can start having users do this. The one thing I will tell you is that if you do want to test this out, always begin with a test subscription. You can do a free 30-day Office 365 test subscription, and you'll just need a domain name that you own that can be used for testing, as well as a certificate. Once you already convert your production one over, then obviously you want to do that on a weekend and test that out. Converting back is pretty straightforward. It's just a simple PowerShell command to convert back to a cloud identity. So in summary, Federation is pretty straightforward. There is some time there involved from getting all the pieces in place, getting the software downloaded, doing the architecture planning, ensuring a high availability model is in place. You know, how many servers do you need, where are you going to place them, things of that nature. And we highly recommend using the Azure AD Connection tool. As I mentioned previously, Office 365 only supports one authentication model. And multiple subscriptions may require multiple Azure AD Connect tools. So if you're going to have multiple Office 365 subscriptions, which is fairly common, you may need multiple of these. With the Derr Sync tool, you could go in and you could actually manage it yourself and set up different management agents. But with this, you probably want to do different instances there. You can typically do this off of one ADFS infrastructure as well, but you may have more complicated configurations. You may have to go in and manually create the claims-aware relying party trust and things of that nature. And lastly, highly recommended but not required, leverage the proxies for external users in free DMZ scenarios. You can authenticate external users to your internal proxies or internal ADFS servers, Or you can use the proxies and dual role as a reverse proxy for your web applications. So let's talk a little about CelestixFederated. So we have a solution that we brought to market about a year ago called CelestixFederated, A and VA series. And what it is basically the ADFS for Office 365 in a box. And it really is designed to help, how do we really streamline and reduce the time frames and costs associated with deploying ADFS for Office 365. Show a little bit of how it works here. So first of all, it does the federated single sign-on. So it does all the ADFS configuration for you in a nice wizard-based format. It will configure Office 365. It will install and configure Azure AD Connect, and it has extensive monitoring auditing capabilities that weren't normally part of out of the box. So for example, how are users authenticating? Are we having users failure? Let me see some charting about user adoption, and let's try to get ahead of some of the problems that may be inherent in our ADFS environment. Flexible deployment architecture. So we have it both as a software version that you can deploy in your own cloud environment, be it private cloud or an Amazon or Azure, or on your own hardware, or on our appliance version too as well. And we'll integrate to any AD infrastructure. So from a benefits perspective, we really look at it as a way to simply deploy. It was a project that came to us again from our relationship with Microsoft, and looking to really streamline of how customers can deploy Federation for Office 365. Very quick integration. You can upgrade current environments to it. You can bring it into your farm too as well if you have an existing farm. So definitely it's a very flexible model there. It's very simple to operate. It's all a web-based GUI. And then we have the dashboard reporting, user auditing. And if you are using a current monitoring solution, because it is Microsoft Windows Server based, you can use something like Operations Manager or any number of their server application monitoring utilities out there. And from a support perspective, we do support ADFS as part of it. So if you have active maintenance, we'll support your environment as a whole. One of the challenges with ADFS is really saying, well, if I have an issue, who do I call for support? I can deploy it, but if something breaks, we may not have the technical skills or the resources to really help us understand what is going on. So we provide 8x5 or 24x7 support, next day hardware replacement, and we also do offer professional services. So if you want to integrate to other applications, we can provide those too as well. So from a next step perspective, definitely we can do deep dives for your specific topical areas that you want to explore. Question from James: if you use ADFS with SAML, you can still use WID. You can use some of the pieces of SAML. The artifact replay is the only part that you cannot use. We offer a 30-day free trial for our virtual series, so you can deploy in your own data center. And then we also offer proof of concept assistant. So if you do like to try, it's not just simply download and go try it. We will offer you support too as well. So with that, I'd like to open up for Q&A. I know, James, you just had a question, so thank you very much for that. At this time, please feel free to use the chat window or the questions pane. Some of the other questions we have, and I briefly touched about this, is this just for Office 365, or can we deploy it for other apps or use it for other applications? And the answer is yes. Definitely you can integrate pretty much any other application out there. ADFS 3 supports the SAML and WS Trust and WS Fed protocols standards. So if your application is compliant to those, definitely we can support them. It was an issue in the past where vendors would try to roll their own SAML type of code, and it would be incompatible with just about everything on the market. So the market and the cloud industry has evolved a long way and come a long way, so now we're all standards-based. Another question that comes up is, and I'm briefly talking about this, can we put this in Azure or Amazon AWS? What would that look like? And the answer is yes, you can. You would have to have some sort of site-to-site tunnel between the Azure AD or the Azure SaaS instance or infrastructure as a service, or Amazon AWS back to your own data center so that the ADFS servers can talk to your domain controller. And ideally, you would have a domain controller replica up there as well to support that authentication, make authentication much quicker. So definitely from a deployment model, it's very flexible on what you can do and how you support that. A few more questions here. Okay. Are there any major benefits to using SQL for the database backend over WID? And that's from James. There is no major benefits, really, other than some of the advanced scenarios that rarely come up. Most database admins probably won't like you putting a unknown database with an unknown schema on their database server and the database cluster, but you can. It's just never really comes up, and it's not necessarily needed for most of the environments there. The other question, we currently use ADFS 2.0 for SSO. How does your product integrate with our existing setup? You can run it in parallel until you're ready to migrate. It wouldn't necessarily be a kind of a side-by-side. You can actually export your current config from ADFS 2.0 to 3.0. So all your claims information, relying party trust, non-claims or relying party trust. There are PowerShell scripts on the server 2012 R2 media to help you export the data and then import it into ADFS 3.0, and it works very cleanly. So what you could do is you could stand up the solution using the same federation name. You can export and import into your environment. You can do some basic testing to make sure ADFS works. There's a test identity provider login initiate URL, IDP initiate sign-on URL, just to make sure things are working. And then you can cut over at that time. And then from a Derr sync perspective, that can happen at any time too as well. So definitely, there's an upgrade path, supported upgrade path. You can run it in parallel and then cut over when you're ready. And the cut over at its core is just going to be a DNS change. Okay, if anybody has any further questions, please feel free. We'll hold on for one more minute, and then we'll conclude. In the meantime, definitely, if you have any more questions or like to get more information, feel free to reach us at sales@celestix.com or give us a call at 510-668-0700. On our website, we have the data sheets and more extensive frequently asked questions and things of that nature. So, but definitely, please feel free to reach out, and hopefully we can answer your questions. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope this was informative, and I hope you learned a little bit about what it takes to set up ADFS for Office 365. And definitely, we look forward to hearing from you in the future.